back here on the Cover 3 podcast as on CBSSports.com. Tom Fornelli always does a great job of being able to identify some of the topics, some of the angles that stand out, and being able to put them into words that some of us are able to read. If you haven't gone to check out the whole story, then I would definitely suggest this as part of this experience. We'll put the link in the description. But Tom, what moved you to really want to highlight and celebrate Haynes King last week?
I was just doing some research on stuff just for other prep stories, getting ready for the year. And I've also, for the last few years, I've been tinkering with like my own quarterback rating stat, which is based more on what college quarterbacks do, trying to find a rating that could encompass like, passing efficiency and QBR and those kind of things are mostly based on a quarterback's ability as a passing, throwing the football, his numbers. I've been trying to create a stat that in camp, it also brings in their rushing ability. It also brings in their ability to avoid sacks and all that kind of stuff. And it's far from complete, but I track it. And I was just going through the data and I noticed, it just dawned on me, or not dawned on me, but I noticed that Haynes King had the highest in this unnamed stat so far of any of the returning quarterbacks from last season. So I was like, so I dug a little further into and it just started making sense because when you look at him as a passer, he was out of the qualified power 4 quarterbacks in the country last year. He was dead last in air yards per attempt. Okay. Nobody is asking Haynes King to throw the ball down the field because he just doesn't have the arm strength to do it. But what Buster Faulkner, Georgia Tech's offensive coordinator, did was he built the passing offense to King's strengths and had him making throws he could, that he was capable of making. And then just his ability to use his legs as a rusher, but also avoiding sacks. And when he does get sacked, he barely loses any yardage. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I think he averaged like negative 2.7 yards per sack, which is incredible because he would scramble, he'd break a tackle, he'd get close to the line of scrimmage before he'd finally go down. So when you put it all together, he's a quarterback who, and I put myself firmly in this camp. When it comes to evaluating a quarterback, a lot of us too often kind of look at them as NFL projections. Is what they're going to do. And like I said, I firmly put myself in that camp, whereas I want to try to find a way to evaluate these guys just as college quarterbacks. Their future be damned. Like, how good are they for what they're asked to do in their offense and their ability level? And Haynes King does so many things where he doesn't make the incredible off-platform rocket throws, but just moving the chains with his legs and then also using his legs to keep his team from getting too far behind the chains. Like when he does get sacked, like I said, he's only losing 2 yards. So instead of being in 2nd and 16, you're in 2nd and 12. It's really not that big of a deal. You can still overcome it. And I just think that is a kind of underappreciated kind of stat. And then also when you get to the red zone, his ability to use his legs to help finish drives. He also doesn't turn the ball over at all. Like he only had 2 or 3 interceptions last year, 2 interceptions last season, based on looking at the chart right now. Thank you for putting that up, Mikey. And he also, I remember too, like you look at those stats, he missed 2 games and he was banged up for a lot of the later part of the year. So he wasn't used. And then also go back to that Georgia game, man. Woo! Watch Georgia Tech versus Georgia and tell me who the best quarterback in that game was. I'll tell you, it was Haynes King. He was the one that he to quote the Greg Jennings Madden thing, he put the team on his back. he was carrying. So I was just looking at all these numbers. I was like, damn, Haynes King is kind of good. And, you see like people put out in their offseason content, like, top 10 quarterbacks. It's like Haynes King's on some of them. He's not on nearly enough of them. Just based on everybody we left and who's coming back, I don't think Haynes King was getting nearly the amount of attention he deserved. So I was like, all right, I'm going to write about Haynes King and give this kid some love because I liked him, but I never really dug into his numbers until last week. And I was like, damn, okay, Haynes, I see you now. So I wrote about it.
I loved it. And like, if you look at Haynes King, he's got that like, hey, I'm super old. I know what I'm good at. I'm a college football player. I can't play pro football. I'm going to go out there and bust my ass, play as hard as I can all the time. And luckily for Tech, like they love the backup too. So they don't have to baby Haynes King. Like they let him play like Haynes King should play. I guess my one worry, as you mentioned, like the air yard stuff, one of the guys that made things happen after the catch on all of those screens and short passes is now playing for Auburn. So like they might be a little bit less dynamic this year. And that's also a team that just had great chemistry last year. Like you could tell sometimes if you're not around the locker room, you can kind of watch the teams and be like, man, they play hard. And like, they know what the hell they're supposed to be doing. They go out there and they play together and they play hard. Everybody's like pretty selfless with it. I thought that was very much Tech last year. And I don't know that that's always something that can repeat year to year. So I do kind of wonder about that. Like, different teams are just different each year. And having your leader back probably helps a ton in kind of facilitating that mindset. But yeah, man, that's a tough kid. He's really good at college football, which is what we cover.
I love the take. I think he's one of the more underrated quarterbacks. I think it was the lock spot I gave out. I thought Georgia Tech against Notre Dame. It was in Atlanta. I thought that was a great. And then all of a sudden we found out he wasn't playing. I was like, oh crap, that's a loser. Like, I think he's just. It's kind of the cliche, but I think he's clutch. Like, when they need a play to be made in a lot of third downs, a lot of red zone stuff, and that was on display in the overtime game against Georgia. But also remember him going against Diego Pavia in the quagmire of the bowl game, and he was really solid in that game too. Like, in bad conditions, he was making throws when they were to be there. I got a question for you though, Tom. If it wasn't him, like, that's one thing I was looking for in the article was, is there a list of guys that fit this category? Because there's another quarterback I was thinking of, like, if I was going to make a case, I would say Kevin Jennings isn't getting enough love and is kind of flying under the radar. And I think it's in large part because he was so bad in the bowl game or in the playoffs against Penn State. Like, that was an awful game. Well, there were a couple drops early, but I just think he's getting completely overlooked for the impact he had at SMU.
Yeah, Kevin Jennings had some good numbers, but I would say the one guy who really came up time and time again in the same areas that I was looking at with King, although not quite to the same level on certain ones, is not a name that's unfamiliar with this show. He plays quarterback for the Baylor Bears.
Yep.
His name is Sawyer Robertson. He's very similar numbers in that and kind of underlooked in that. As far as my unnamed QB stat, he's actually second behind King among returners. But to put a little more context on King's ability to avoid losing yards by, his sack avoidance kind of situation, I just looked it up. I found the article. I was able to find it. He was sacked on only 2.5% of his dropbacks last year, which was third among Power 4 quarterbacks. But the real part is he was sacked 7 times. He lost 17 yards total on those 7 sacks. So 2.43 yards lost per sack. The next lowest number of any qualified quarterback was Rocco Becht at 4.38. So you're basically looking at a difference of 2 yards per sack on average between Haynes King and anybody else in the country, which is huge, especially when you're on a team like Georgia Tech. And you can't afford, like, the way that offense works, they can't afford to be in long-term, like third and long. That's not going to work for them. So he keeps them out of those situations. I just think that overall, he is an incredible fit for what they're doing in that offense, both him to them and the way that they build the offense around him. I think it makes them a very unique and dangerous team. I liked
the Ukber. Can we call it the Ukber, or do you think you're going to pivot and actually give it a name? Because it's UQB.
That's what I called it in the article.
Yeah, the Ukber.
If I ever get it to a point where I feel like it's worth publicly sharing, I'll probably name it after a college quarterback.
Because Curtis Rourke, being one of the nation's leaders in this stat, kind of checked out to tell you what kind of traits we're looking for here.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's.
And Cam Ward was number 1 overall, which won't surprise anybody.
Yeah, and guess what? It also celebrates the number 1 overall NFL draft pick. I'll throw this one out there. Definite vibes play, but I think the competitiveness, I think that comes from Brent Key. Like, obviously, totally. Haynes King is a part of that, and Jamal Haynes, and that goes back to when he took over mid-season. And then, like, the team just kind of rallied around him, and they scored a couple big wins right towards the end of that after he took over for Jeff Collins. He gets the full-time job. They've had all these big moments. I think that Haynes King and Brent Key has been sort of a perfect marriage of old quarterback leader and a head coach who's trying to instill a mentality that Georgia Tech needs if Georgia Tech's going to be, competing with the best teams in the ACC. So, check it out. Haynes King, the most underrated quarterback at FBS, and the Ukber, the unnamed quarterback rating, UQBR. You can go find it at cbssports.com.